Long before Germany was a country, its lands were a vast, untamed wilderness. Imagine deep, dark forests stretching for hundreds of miles, broken only by misty swamps and winding rivers like the Rhine and the Elbe. This was a world ruled by nature, a place where sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor and the howl of wolves echoed through the ancient trees. This was the homeland of the Germanic tribes, a collection of fierce and independent peoples, like the Cherusci, the Suebi, and the Goths. They were not a single nation but a patchwork of clans, each with its own customs, leaders, and gods. They were farmers and warriors living in small wooden settlements, their lives dictated by the changing seasons and the constant need to defend their territory from rivals. Their society was built on loyalty to one's chief and kin, valuing courage in battle above all else. Into this world of forests and tribes came the mightiest empire the world had ever known, Rome. The Romans, with their organized legions, advanced engineering, and unquenchable thirst for expansion, saw the lands east of the Rhine as a new frontier to conquer. They called it Germania. For decades, Roman armies pushed north and east, building forts, roads, and bridges determined to bring these barbarians under their imperial control. They saw the Germanic people as wild and undisciplined, yet they also respected their bravery and fighting spirit. Many Germanic warriors were even recruited into the Roman army as auxiliaries, learning the very tactics they would one day turn against their masters. The clash was inevitable, a collision between two vastly different worlds, one of urban order and imperial law, the other of tribal freedom and the untamed forest. The turning point came in the year 9 AD, a date seared into the Roman psyche. A young Germanic chieftain named Arminius, who had been raised in Rome and even served as a Roman officer, orchestrated one of history's greatest ambushes. He had learned the Roman strengths and, more importantly, their weaknesses. He lured 3 entire Roman legions, led by the governor Publius Quinctilius Varus, deep into the treacherous Teutoburg forest. Here, where the Romans' disciplined formations were useless amidst the dense trees and marshy ground, Arminius and his united tribal warriors struck. For 3 days, they harried and slaughtered the trapped Romans, annihilating an army of nearly 20,000 men. The defeat was so catastrophic that it halted Roman expansion into Germania forever. The victory at Teutoburg Forest became a foundational myth for the Germanic peoples, a symbol of their ability to resist even the most powerful of empires. Arminius was hailed as a liberator, a hero who had preserved their way of life. Yet, this unity was fleeting. After the Roman threat receded, the tribes soon returned to their internal rivalries and conflicts. Arminius himself was eventually killed by his own kinsmen, who feared he was becoming too powerful. The lack of a single, unifying leader meant that for centuries, the lands of Germania remained a mosaic of competing groups. It wasn't until the rise of a new power, the Franks, that the first steps toward a larger, more cohesive German identity would be taken, laying the groundwork for the empires to come. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, a powerful Germanic tribe, the Franks, began to fill the power vacuum in Gaul, which is modern-day France. Under ambitious leaders like Clovis, they converted to Christianity and expanded their kingdom, creating a new center of power in post-Roman Europe. This Frankish kingdom reached its absolute zenith under one of the most influential figures in European history, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. He was a towering figure, both literally and figuratively, a brilliant military strategist, a devout Christian, and a visionary ruler who dreamed of recreating the unity and glory of the old Roman Empire. His reign from 768 to 814 was one of near constant campaigning, as he expanded his empire to include what is now France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and crucially, large parts of Germany. Charlemagne's legacy was immense. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a master administrator and a patron of learning. He established a new capital at Aachen in modern-day Germany and turned it into a cultural hub. He sponsored a revival of art, architecture, and education known as the Carolingian Renaissance, attracting scholars from all over Europe to his court. He standardized laws and currency and created a system of envoys to ensure his commands were followed throughout his vast realm. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head in Rome and declared him Emperor of the Romans. This act symbolically linked his Frankish kingdom to the legacy of ancient Rome and the authority of the Christian Church, creating a new political entity in the heart of Europe. However, Charlemagne's grand empire was held together largely by the force of his own personality. After his death in 814, his successors lacked his vision and skill, and the empire began to fracture under the weight of internal disputes and external threats from Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens. His grandsons fought amongst themselves for control, culminating in the Treaty of Verdun in 843. This crucial treaty divided the Carolingian Empire into three parts: Media Group, vintage map of Carolingian Empire division, animated split of medieval kingdom map at stock at distribute _equally. The western part would eventually become France, and the Middle Kingdom would be a source of conflict for centuries. The eastern part, known as East Francia, formed the core of what would one day become the Kingdom of Germany. This division marked a pivotal moment, the beginning of separate paths for the French and German peoples. Within this new kingdom of East Francia, a new line of powerful dukes emerged. One of the most capable was Otto I, Duke of Saxony, who became king in 936. Like Charlemagne, Otto was a formidable warrior and a clever politician. He asserted his authority over the other powerful German dukes, and scored a decisive victory against the invading Magyar horsemen at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, securing the kingdom's eastern borders. His power and prestige grew so great that in 962 he traveled to Rome, where the Pope crowned him emperor. This event is seen by historians as the true beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, a vast, complex, and often fragmented political entity that would dominate Central Europe for the next 800 years, with the German king at its heart. The Holy Roman Empire was, from its very inception, a peculiar and complicated beast. It was called holy because of its close ties to the papacy and Rome, Roman because it claimed to be the successor to the ancient empire, but in reality, it was overwhelmingly German in character. Unlike the more centralized kingdoms of England or France, the empire was never a unified state. Instead, it was a sprawling patchwork of hundreds of individual territories, duchies, principalities, free cities, and bishoprics, all held together in a loose federation under an elected emperor. The emperor's power was often more theoretical than real, as he constantly had to negotiate with the powerful nobles and princes who ruled their own lands almost as independent kings. One of the defining struggles of the medieval period in Germany was the epic power clash between the emperors and the popes. This conflict, known as the investiture controversy, was about who had the ultimate authority to appoint bishops and other high-ranking church officials within the empire. The pope believed it was his spiritual right, while the emperor argued it was his political right, as these bishops also controlled vast lands and wealth. The most dramatic moment came in 1077, when Emperor Henry IV, who had been excommunicated by Pope Gregory VII, was forced to travel to a castle at Canossa in Italy. There he stood for 3 days in the snow as a penitent, begging the Pope for forgiveness, a stunning display of papal power over the most powerful secular ruler in Europe. While emperors and popes battled for supremacy, a different kind of power was growing in the towns and cities of northern Germany. This was the era of the Hanseatic League, a formidable commercial and defensive alliance of merchant guilds and their market towns. Led by the city of Lübeck, the League dominated trade across the Baltic and North Seas for centuries. Its powerful ships called cogs carried timber, grain, furs and fish from Russia and Scandinavia to England and Flanders, bringing immense wealth and influence to cities like Hamburg, Bremen and Cologne. The Hanseatic League was so powerful that it could raise its own armies, wage war, and negotiate treaties, acting almost as an independent state within the empire. Life in medieval Germany was a study in contrasts. Outside the bustling cities, the landscape was dotted with imposing stone castles, the fortified homes of the nobility and symbols of their power over the surrounding countryside. For the vast majority of people, however, life was a hard grind of agricultural labor under the feudal system. Then, in the mid-14th century, disaster struck. The Black Death swept across Europe, and Germany was not spared. The pandemic wiped out an estimated 1/3 of the population, causing immense social and economic upheaval. Labor became scarce, entire villages were abandoned, and the old feudal order was severely weakened, paving the way for profound changes in the centuries to come. In the early 16th century, the Holy Roman Empire was a society ripe for change, simmering with social and religious discontent. The Catholic Church, though powerful, was widely seen as corrupt, particularly for its practice of selling indulgences. pieces of paper that supposedly reduced a person's time in purgatory. It was in this climate that an Augustinian monk and theology professor from Wittenberg, named Martin Luther, stepped onto the world stage. Troubled by his own spiritual anxieties and disgusted by the church's practices, Luther came to a radical new understanding of Christianity. He believed that salvation was not earned through good works or bought with money, but was a free gift from God, received through faith alone. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the Pope and the entire church hierarchy. On October 31, 1517, Luther famously nailed his 95 Theses, a list of arguments against the sale of indulgences, to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. This act, intended to start a scholarly debate, instead lit a fire that would engulf Europe. Thanks to the newly invented printing press, Luther's ideas spread with incredible speed throughout the German states and beyond. His calls for reform resonated with many princes who wanted to seize church lands and reduce papal influence, merchants who resented sending money to Rome, and common people who yearned for a more personal and direct form of faith. When the Pope demanded he recant, Luther refused, leading to his excommunication and condemnation as a heretic by the emperor. Luther's defiance split German society down the middle. Many princes and free cities embraced his teachings, adopting what became known as Protestantism, while others, particularly in the South, remained loyal to the Catholic Church. This religious division shattered the already fragile unity of the Holy Roman Empire, turning it into a battleground of faiths. Decades of religious tension and conflict followed, as Protestant and Catholic states vied for power and influence. This schism wasn't just about theology, it was deeply intertwined with politics, power, and identity, creating deep and lasting fissures that would define German history for centuries. The dream of a single unified Christian empire under one emperor and one pope was dead forever. These simmering religious tensions finally exploded into one of the most brutal and destructive conflicts in European history, the 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 1648. What began as a revolt by Protestant nobles in Bohemia against the Catholic emperor soon spiraled into a continent-spanning catastrophe, drawing in nearly every major European power. The German lands became the primary battlefield, crisscrossed by marauding armies of mercenaries who slaughtered civilians, burned cities, and spread famine and disease. The devastation was almost unimaginable. Some estimates suggest that the population of the German states was reduced by as much as a third. The war finally ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, a series of treaties that reshaped the map of Europe. It formally recognized the religious division of the empire and severely weakened the power of the emperor, granting the individual German states almost complete sovereignty. Out of the ashes of the 30 Years' War, a new power began to emerge in northern Germany, Brandenburg Prussia. At first it was really just a modest and scattered collection of territories, but Prussia was forged into a formidable state by a series of ambitious and disciplined rulers from the Hohenzollern dynasty. They built a highly efficient civil service and, most importantly, a powerful and professional army that was disproportionately large for the size of their state. The Prussian state was famously described not as a country with an army, but as an army with a country. This military-first ethos would come to define Prussia's identity and its aggressive expansionist policies, setting it on a collision course with the traditional great power of the German world, Austria. The ruler who truly elevated Prussia to the status of a major European power was Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great. Reigning from 1740 to 1786, Frederick was a complex figure, an enlightened despot who composed music and corresponded with philosophers like Voltaire, but also a ruthless and brilliant military commander. He wasted no time in using the powerful army his father had built, seizing the wealthy Austrian province of Silesia and successfully defending it against Austria and its allies in a series of brutal wars. His victories established Prussia as a serious rival to Austria for dominance over the German states, creating a dualism that would shape German politics for the next century. Frederick's reign cemented Prussia's reputation for military prowess and administrative efficiency. The old, fractured Holy Roman Empire, which had existed for nearly a millennium, was finally swept away by another revolutionary force from the West, Napoleon Bonaparte. At the turn of the 19th century, Napoleon's French armies marched across Europe, shattering old regimes and redrawing the political map. In a series of stunning victories, they defeated the Austrians and Prussians, occupying much of Germany. In 1806, Napoleon formally dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, a momentous event that ended an institution that had defined Central Europe since the time of Charlemagne. He consolidated the hundreds of tiny German states into a more manageable number under the Confederation of the Rhine, which was effectively a French satellite. While humiliating, the Napoleonic occupation had a profound and unexpected effect on the German people. It sparked a powerful wave of nationalism. For the first time, people began to think of themselves not just as Saxons, Bavarians, or Prussians, but as Germans, united by a common language, culture, and a shared enemy. Thinkers and poets called for national liberation and unity. This newfound patriotic fervor fueled a series of reforms, especially in Prussia, which rebuilt its army and state to challenge French domination. This period of wars of liberation culminated in the epic Battle of Leipzig in 1813, where a coalition of German and other European states decisively defeated Napoleon, driving him out of Germany and setting the stage for a new chapter in the long struggle for German unification. After Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, the leaders of Europe met at the Congress of Vienna to restore order. They replaced Napoleon's Confederation of the Rhine with the German Confederation, which was basically a loose association of 39 German-speaking states, once again dominated by Austria. For the next few decades, the spirit of nationalism that had been awakened during the Napoleonic Wars continued to simmer just beneath the surface. Liberals and nationalists dreamed of a single, unified German nation-state with a constitution and guaranteed rights. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution began to transform the German lands. Railways crisscrossed the country, factories sprang up in the Ruhr Valley, and a new industrial working class emerged, creating new economic ties that made the political divisions seem increasingly outdated. The simmering tensions erupted in the revolutions of 1848, which swept across Europe. In Germany, liberals, students, and workers took to the streets, demanding unity and freedom. A national assembly, the Frankfurt Parliament, was convened to write a constitution for a united Germany. It was a moment of incredible hope and intellectual fervor. However, the revolutionaries were divided, and they lacked the power to enforce their decisions. When they finally offered the crown of a unified Germany to King Frederick William IV of Prussia, he famously rejected it, contemptuously calling it a crown from the gutter because it was offered by commoners, not by his fellow princes. The revolution failed, and the hopes of a liberal, unified Germany were crushed. The failure of 1848 taught the conservatives a lesson. If Germany were to be united, it would not be through liberal speeches and parliamentary votes, but through power politics. The man who would master this game was Otto von Bismarck, appointed Prime Minister of Prussia in 1862. A brilliant, ruthless, and deeply conservative statesman, Bismarck was a master of realpolitik, a style of diplomacy based on practical power rather than ideology or ethics. He famously declared that the great questions of the day would not be settled by speeches and majority decisions, but by blood and iron. His goal was to unite Germany under Prussian leadership, and he was prepared to use any means necessary, including war, to achieve it. Bismarck masterfully orchestrated a series of 3 short, decisive wars to achieve his goal. First, in 1864, he allied with Austria to seize the duchies of Schleswig-Holstein from Denmark. Then, he deliberately provoked a conflict with his former ally, crushing the Austrians in a matter of weeks in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. This victory expelled Austria from German affairs and allowed Prussia to annex several northern German states, forming the North German Confederation. The final step was to bring the southern German states into the fold. Bismarck engineered a diplomatic crisis with France, goading Emperor Napoleon III into declaring war. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71 was a stunning triumph for the technologically superior and brilliantly led Prussian army. In the patriotic fervor following the victory, the southern German states agreed to join the new German Empire. On January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor, or Kaiser. After centuries of division, Germany was finally a unified nation-state. The new German Empire, which Bismarck had built with a lot of effort, quickly became super strong in Europe. This time was called the Gründerzeit, or Founders' Era, and it was a time of huge growth for money and businesses. German factories, science, and new ideas shot ahead, catching up to Britain, who had been the leader for a long time. Companies like Siemens, Bayer, and Krupp became the best in the world. More and more people lived in Germany, cities got bigger, and a new group of powerful middle-class people showed up. For 20 years, Bismarck was very smart about leading the new empire. He worked to make it strong at home and keep peace with other countries. He did this by making a lot of complicated agreements with other nations. His goal was to keep France alone and stop a big war in Europe. He thought Germany had enough land and was happy with its new borders. But the way Germany was set up politically and socially was very tense. Even though they had a parliament called the Reichstag, where men could vote, the real power was with the Kaiser, the emperor, and his chancellor. Bismarck, who was very old-fashioned, saw the Social Democratic Party getting more and more popular. This party was for the factory workers, and Bismarck thought they were a big danger. He tried to stop them with laws against socialists, but at the same time, he started new programs like health insurance and money for old people, hoping to make the workers loyal to him. This made society very divided. There was a strong government that told people what to do, and a growing group of people who wanted more democracy. The careful balance Bismarck had kept was broken in 1890, when a young and eager Kaiser named Wilhelm II became emperor. He quickly fired the old chancellor. Wilhelm was a loud and quick-to-act ruler who wanted Germany to be famous around the world. He stopped Bismarck's careful way of dealing with other countries. Instead, he started an aggressive and ambitious Weltpolitik, or world policy. This new plan meant building a huge navy to challenge Britain's power at sea. It also meant being more forceful about getting colonies and talking in a more aggressive way. This made Germany's neighbors, especially Britain, France, and Russia, very worried. They saw Germany getting stronger and its leader being unpredictable as a threat to the peace in Europe, so they made their own alliances, creating two heavily armed, opposing groups in Europe. Everything was ready for a terrible fight. A complicated network of alliances, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on one side, and France, Russia, and Great Britain on the other. A race to build more weapons, fierce competition for colonies, and strong feelings of nationalism created a dangerous situation, like a barrel of gunpowder. The spark that set it off happened in June 1914 when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was killed in Sarajevo. A small problem in one area quickly grew bigger as the alliances kicked in. Germany promised Austria-Hungary full support, Russia got its army ready to help its friend Serbia, and Germany, feeling surrounded, attacked France through neutral Belgium without waiting. This action brought Britain into the war, and by August 1914, the big powers of Europe had jumped into the horrible killing of World War I. After 4 years of brutal trench warfare, Germany was defeated. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, and the empire collapsed. In its place, a new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, was established. It faced an almost impossible task from the very beginning. It was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed crippling reparations, stripped Germany of its colonies and territory, and included the infamous War Guilt Clause, forcing Germany to accept sole blame for the war. This was seen as a national humiliation by many Germans, who associated the new democracy with defeat and dishonor. The Republic was plagued by political instability, with extremist groups from both the left and the right attempting to overthrow the government. The early years of the Weimar Republic were marked by chaos, including hyperinflation in 1923, when money became so worthless that people used wheelbarrows to carry cash for a loaf of bread. Although the Republic experienced a period of relative stability and cultural vibrancy in the mid-1920s, its foundations remained fragile. The onset of the Great Depression in 1929 was the final fatal blow. As the world economy collapsed, German unemployment skyrocketed, businesses failed, and people's life savings were wiped out. The economic misery created a climate of desperation and fear in which millions of Germans lost faith in democracy and became receptive to the promises of extremist politicians who offered simple solutions and scapegoats for the nation's problems. One of these extremists was Adolf Hitler, the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazis. A failed artist and charismatic orator, Hitler skillfully exploited the national sense of grievance and economic despair. He blamed Germany's problems on the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar politicians, communists, and most virulently the Jews, whom he scapegoated in a toxic ideology of racial hatred. His promises to restore German greatness, create jobs, and build a powerful, racially pure Third Reich resonated with a growing number of Germans. Through a combination of propaganda, intimidation by his paramilitary stormtroopers, the SA, and clever political maneuvering, the Nazi Party grew from a fringe group into the largest party in the Reichstag. In January 1933, President Hindenburg reluctantly appointed Hitler as chancellor. Once in power, Hitler moved with ruthless speed to dismantle German democracy. He used the Reichstag fire as a pretext to suspend civil liberties, ban other political parties, and establish a one-party dictatorship. His regime, the Third Reich, began a massive program of rearmament and public works, which pulled Germany out of the Depression and made him immensely popular. At the same time, it unleashed a reign of terror, persecuting and imprisoning political opponents, and systematically stripping Jewish citizens of their rights, property, and humanity. This persecution culminated in the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored genocide of 6 million European Jews and millions of others, including Roma, homosexuals, and disabled people. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy, aimed at conquering Lebensraum, living space in Eastern Europe, led directly to the outbreak of World War II in 1939. The war, which became the deadliest conflict in human history, ended in 1945 with Germany's total defeat and utter destruction, its cities in ruins and its moral standing in tatters. With the end of World War II in 1945, Germany ceased to exist as a unified sovereign state. The victorious Allied powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain and France, divided the country and its capital Berlin into 4 occupation zones. As the wartime alliance between the Western powers and the Soviet Union disintegrated into the Cold War, this division became permanent. In 1949, the 3 Western zones were merged to form the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, a parliamentary democracy with a capitalist economy. In response, the Soviets established the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, a communist one-party state under the tight control of Moscow. Germany had become the epicenter of the ideological struggle between East and West. Life in the 2 Germanys developed along starkly different paths. West Germany, aided by the Marshall Plan from the United States, experienced a stunning economic recovery known as the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. It rapidly rebuilt its industries and became a prosperous, stable democracy, firmly integrated into the Western Alliance through NATO and the precursor to the European Union. In contrast, East Germany's state-controlled economy stagnated. While it provided basic necessities and employment for all, it suffered from chronic shortages, poor quality goods, and a lack of innovation. Political freedom was non-existent. The secret police, the Stasi, maintained a pervasive network of spies and informants, creating an atmosphere of fear and repression that stifled all dissent. The stark contrast between freedom and prosperity in the West and repression and scarcity in the East led millions of East Germans to flee to the West, most of them through the open border in the divided city of Berlin. To halt this massive brain drain, the East German regime took a desperate and dramatic step. On the night of August 13, 1961, they began constructing the Berlin Wall, a heavily guarded concrete barrier that physically sealed off East Berlin from West Berlin. The wall became the most potent and ugly symbol of the Cold War, a death strip of barbed wire, guard towers, and mines designed to keep people in, not out. For nearly 3 decades it stood as a brutal monument to Germany's division and the ideological chasm that split the world. By the late 1980s, the communist bloc was crumbling under economic pressure and growing popular discontent. Inspired by the reforms of Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, a wave of peaceful protests swept across Eastern Europe. In East Germany, massive pro-democracy demonstrations grew week by week in cities like Leipzig. The pressure became unbearable, and on the chaotic night of November 9, 1989, a confused East German official mistakenly announced that the border crossings were open. Thousands of jubilant East and West Berliners swarmed the wall, climbing on top of it and tearing it down with hammers and picks in one of the most emotional and iconic moments of the 20th century. This paved the way for the swift reunification of Germany, which was formally completed on October 3, 1990. Today, a unified Germany stands as Europe's economic powerhouse and a leading voice in international affairs, a stable democracy that has confronted its dark past to become a pillar of a peaceful and integrated Europe.